in the golden dawn of Hollywood's most mythic era, when silent films flickered to life in darkened theaters and the very concept of celebrity was being invented frame by frame, there stood a mansion on a hill that would become more than mere real estate. It would become a symbol, a shrine, a palace where the boundaries between cinema and reality dissolved into something altogether more enchanting, Pickfair. Even the name sounds like a fairy tale, doesn't it? A portmanteau born from the union of two names that in the 1920s carried more weight than royalty, more magnetism than any crowned head of Europe. Mary Pickford and Douglas Fairbanks, America's sweetheart, and the king of Hollywood, the first true superstars of the silver screen, whose marriage wasn't just a union of hearts, but the coronation of a new kind of aristocracy. An aristocracy built not on bloodlines or inherited titles, but on talent, charisma, and the revolutionary power of moving pictures. But this is not simply the story of a house, however magnificent, nor is it merely the tale of two legendary actors, however beloved. This is the story of how Hollywood learned to dream in marble and gold, how it taught America and the world to worship at the altar of fame. Pickfair was the first true celebrity estate, the template from which all others would follow. It was where kings and queens, presidents and poets, artists and aristocrats came to pay homage to the new royalty of the 20th century. For nearly 2 decades, from the early 1920s through the late 1930s, Pickfair reigned as the unofficial White House of Hollywood. Within its walls, empires were built and destroyed over cocktails. Careers were launched with a whispered recommendation. The future of the film industry was debated in drawing rooms adorned with priceless art. And through it all, Mary and Douglas presided like benevolent monarchs over a kingdom that existed both everywhere and nowhere in the collective imagination of millions. Tonight, we return to that hill in Beverly Hills, to that sprawling estate of 18 rooms and endless legend, to understand how a house became a symbol, how two people became myths, and how Hollywood, in its most innocent and ambitious youth, built itself a castle worthy of the dreams it sold to the world. This is the story of Pickfair, and like all great Hollywood stories, it begins with love, ambition, and the intoxicating belief that anything, absolutely anything, is possible. May 1919, Beverly Hills hardly exists yet as the coherent city it will become. Orange groves still dominate. Dirt roads climb toward undeveloped hills where coyotes hunt at dusk. The air tastes of sage and dry earth. Douglas Fairbanks stands at the base of a hunting lodge, modest, Spanish colonial, unremarkable, perched 18 acres into the slope. He's 36 years old, already a star, already rich from silent films that print money, The Mark of Zorro, Robin Hood, The Three Musketeers. His athleticism translates perfectly to film. Backflips, sword fights, charm delivered without words. Beside him, Mary Pickford, 27. The most famous woman in the world. And that's not Hollywood exaggeration. America's sweetheart, they call her, though the label undersells her power. She's not just an actress, she's a producer, a businesswoman, co-founder of United Artists alongside Fairbanks, Charlie Chaplin, and D.W. Griffith. She earns $10,000 weekly when factory workers make $20. They're married to other people. That detail matters for exactly 6 more months. Fairbanks points up the hill. We'll expand it, he says. Not build, expand. He's already purchased the property, already planning the transformation from hunting lodge to estate, worthy of Hollywood royalty, that doesn't exist yet, because they're about to invent it. The original structure survives from 1909. A modest dwelling commissioned by Los Angeles attorney and real estate developer Charles Cook, designed by architect Herbert Banta. 25 rooms spread across several thousand square feet. respectable, comfortable, invisible. Fairbanks sees past the modest frame. He sees terraces cascading down the hillside, sees stables and tennis courts and a swimming pool, the first in-ground pool in Los Angeles, though that claim varies depending on which historian you consult. He sees a place where power gathers not in boardrooms, but over dinner, over tennis, over long weekends when the most influential people in America arrive as guests and leave as collaborators. Mary Pickford sees something different. She sees escape from the crushing weight of public scrutiny. A place where America's sweetheart can exist as Mary Smith from Toronto, a woman who fought her way from poverty to power and wants one corner of the world where the performance stops, neither vision survives intact. By November 1919, they're married to each other now. Their previous marriages dissolved in Nevada divorces that scandalize and fascinate in equal measure. The public forgives them because the public always forgives beautiful people who make them happy. Fairbanks and Pickford make millions happy weekly in darkened theaters across the globe. They name the estate Pickfair, not Fairpick. Her name first. That detail tells you who holds the actual power. The wedding itself occurs in late March 1920. Though they've been planning the life together since late 1918. The ceremony is private, surprisingly so for two people whose lives are otherwise performed for public consumption. Pickford wears cream silk. Fairbanks wears a dark suit. A minister presides. Fewer than 20 guests attend. The privacy is strategic. Their divorces created scandal enough. A modest wedding suggests respectability, suggests this is genuine love rather than Hollywood indulgence. The press believes it. America believes it. Even Pickford and Fairbanks believe it, at least initially. The honeymoon occurs at Pickfair itself. They don't travel to Europe or exotic locations. They stay home, supervising the early stages of transformation, making decisions about expansion, choosing furniture, planting gardens. The estate becomes their shared project, the physical manifestation of their partnership, their power, their vision of what Hollywood aristocracy should look like. Wallace Neff receives the commission in early 1920. He's 31 years old, already establishing his reputation designing Spanish colonial revival estates for California's emerging wealthy class. Before Pickfair, he's completed the O'Neill House in Beverly Hills, the Edwin D. Neff House in San Marino, each demonstrating his particular genius for blending Mediterranean romance with California modernism. Neff understands his assignment: transform the hunting lodge into a palace without making it look like transformation. It must appear inevitable, as if Pickfair always existed in this form, waiting to be discovered rather than constructed. The work begins in spring 1920 and continues for 3 years, with modifications, expansions, and refinements extending well into the mid-1920s, not demolition and reconstruction, evolution. The original hunting lodge remains at the core, surrounded by new wings, new terraces, new systems that turn a house into an estate. Neff adds 2 elegant wings framing the central structure. An L-shaped porch wraps the southern exposure. Copper roofing, detailed with ornate ironwork, caps the expansion. Leaded glass windows, some imported from European estates, filter California sunlight into amber and rose. Parquet flooring in geometric patterns covers what had been simple wood planks. Ceiling murals depict celestial themes, constellations, angels, classical gods watching from painted heavens. The design philosophy reflects Neff's broader approach to California architecture. He rejects the Victorian excess that dominated Los Angeles construction in the late 19th century. He rejects also the emerging modernism that will define mid-century California. Instead, he pursues Mediterranean classicism adapted to California contexts, drawing on Spanish colonial traditions, Italian villa aesthetics, and French chateau proportions while accommodating California's climate, landscape, and informal social patterns. At Pickfair, this philosophy manifests in deliberate contradictions. Formal reception rooms with coffered ceilings and European furniture open onto casual terraces where guests gather in sports clothes. Grand staircases descend to basement recreation rooms with bowling alleys and billiard tables. The architecture suggests old-world permanence while accommodating new-world casualness. The materials arrive on railroad schedules tighter than passenger trains, lumber from Oregon, old-growth Douglas fir for framing, clear vertical grain resistant to warping, marble from quarries that supplied Mediterranean palaces, ironwork forged in San Francisco. Foundries, tiles, approximately 36,000 antique Spanish tiles, acquired from estates across Spain and shipped in crates of straw. These material choices matter beyond aesthetics. Pickford and Fairbanks want authenticity, or at least the appearance of authenticity. New tiles manufactured in California would cost less and arrive faster, but they lack the patina, the irregular edges, the subtle color variations that suggest age and provenance. Antique Spanish tiles tell guests, this isn't merely expensive, this is historically significant. The same logic drives furniture acquisition. Louis XVI chairs purchased from French dealers, tapestries from Belgian estates, Persian rugs from dealers in New York who source from collapsing Ottoman territories. Each piece carries documentation, often exaggerated or entirely fabricated, tracing lineage to European royalty or historical events. Pickford becomes obsessed with provenance. She wants furniture owned by Marie Antoinette, paintings commissioned by Spanish kings, decorative objects with stories attached. The stories matter as much as the objects. They transform purchases into educational experiences, allowing Pickford to lecture guests about history while simultaneously demonstrating her sophistication. Workforce numbers remain frustratingly vague in surviving records. Construction crews likely peaked between 50 and 80 workers during major expansion phases, though payroll ledgers that would confirm exact figures appear lost to time. What survives? Photographs showing men in work clothes, names occasionally mentioned in contemporary newspaper accounts. Joseph Barreto, master mason, credited with the stonework on the main terrace. William Chen, head gardener, who transforms raw hillside into cascading gardens that will photograph like European estates transported wholesale to California. The labor operates on seasonal rhythms. Heavy construction occurs during dry months, May through October, when rain won't delay masonry work or damage exposed interiors. Winters bring finish work, painting, installing fixtures, laying floors. The pattern extends the timeline but ensures quality. Workers earn standard construction wages for the era. Skilled tradesmen like masons and carpenters receive approximately 75 cents to $1 hourly. General laborers earn 50 to 60 cents hourly. These wages are respectable for 1920s California, better than agricultural work or factory labor, though nowhere near the fortune Pickford and Fairbanks earn. The budget remains unclear, a pattern that will haunt Pickfair throughout its history. Estimates vary wildly. Some sources suggest initial construction and expansion costs approach $300,000, equivalent to roughly $5 million today. Others claim higher figures, but without surviving financial records, precision remains impossible. What's certain? The money flows freely because the money keeps arriving. Pickford and Fairbanks each earn more annually than most Americans will see in lifetimes. They're not building a house. They're constructing proof that Hollywood glamour translates into real power. The kind that presidents notice. Neff visits the construction site weekly, sometimes daily during critical phases. He's hands-on, adjusting designs based on how spaces actually feel rather than how they appear on blueprints. He understands that houses are experienced sequentially. You move through them, experiencing revelation and surprise as new spaces unfold. He choreographs these experiences deliberately. The approach from Summit Drive matters. Guests first see gates, wrought iron, elaborate, imposing, without being fortress-like. Then a curved driveway through landscaping that suggests wilderness tamed but not eliminated. Then the house itself, revealing gradually as the driveway curves, so the full scale doesn't register until you're almost at the entrance. The entrance hall is deliberately modest, high ceiling, elegant but not overwhelming. This restraint makes the subsequent spaces more impressive. The living room, visible through wide doorways, promises grandeur. The staircase ascending to private quarters suggests mystery. The terrace beyond, glimpsed through windows, promises California landscape integrated into European aesthetics. Every detail receives this level of attention. Neff isn't just designing rooms. He's designing experiences, choreographing emotions, manipulating perception to create desired impressions. The result, completed primarily by 1923, with refinements continuing through 1925, succeeds beyond expectations. Pickfair photographs beautifully, crucial for its function as public symbol of Hollywood glamour. It hosts comfortably, essential for its function as social headquarters. It impresses without intimidating, necessary for maintaining Pickford's America's sweetheart persona that must remain accessible despite enormous wealth. Architecturally, it represents California at a specific historical moment, confident, optimistic, wealthy enough to import European culture, but independent enough to adapt it to local conditions. The style will influence California residential architecture for decades, but Neff creates something else, probably unintentionally, a building that requires unsustainable resources to maintain. The antique tiles need specialized repair. The copper roofing requires expert maintenance. The gardens demand constant attention. The systems, electrical, plumbing, heating, are custom installations requiring specialized knowledge to service. Beauty, yes, but beauty that consumes resources infinitely, that demands perpetual investment, that cannot survive neglect. The architecture guarantees that Pickfair will either be maintained perfectly or deteriorate dramatically. There's no middle ground. Stand at the front entrance. The view commands Beverly Hills spreading below, undeveloped still in the early 1920s, gradually, filling with estates that follow Pickfair's example. Orange groves persist, mountains frame the northern horizon. On clear days, the Pacific glints 20 miles distant. Beautiful, yes. Step past the showpiece rooms, and the other face appears. Behind the beauty lies infrastructure, the machinery that keeps fantasy functioning. This parallel world is designed to remain invisible, but its absence would make the fantasy impossible. Deep in the basement, boiler rooms burning coal to heat water for radiators throughout the mansion. The estate generates its own electricity, a private power plant tucked into the hillside, humming constantly. Copper wiring threads through walls like nervous systems. Water arrives from municipal lines, but passes through filtration systems before reaching faucets and that pioneering swimming pool. The power plant deserves particular attention. Most Hollywood estates in the early 1920s rely on Los Angeles's municipal electrical grid, still expanding throughout the region. Pickfair installs its own generation capacity, gasoline-powered generators initially, later supplemented by connection to municipal power as Beverly Hills infrastructure develops. Why generate private power, control, reliability, status? The municipal grid experiences frequent outages during the 1920s as demand exceeds capacity. Private generation ensures lights never fail during parties. Refrigeration never stops. Projection equipment for the screening room operates flawlessly. But private power requires constant fuel delivery. Gasoline arrives weekly in tank trucks, and constant maintenance. The generators need oil changes, part replacements, expert attention. One full-time mechanic, Arthur Schmidt, according to fragmentary payroll records, maintains the power systems throughout the 1920s. The heating system operates at similar scale. Coal arrives monthly in multi-ton deliveries, stored in basement bins that occupy space, equivalent to several modern garages. Boilers burn approximately 2 tons of coal weekly during winter months, December through February, when Beverly Hills temperatures occasionally drop to 40 degrees at night, requiring interior heating for comfort. 2 men work full-time as boiler operators and coal handlers during winter. Their names survive in a 1924 newspaper account of a minor coal dust explosion that injured one worker, Michael Brennan, age 41, treated for burns and respiratory distress at Hollywood Hospital, recovered fully, continued employment at Pickfair until at least 1927. The kitchen operates at industrial scale. Multiple ovens allow simultaneous preparation of different dishes, necessary when dinner parties serve 60 guests across multiple courses. Refrigeration rooms the size of small apartments. Electric cooling still novel in 1920, expensive, unreliable, store perishables. The refrigeration technology deserves examination. Early electric refrigerators use ammonia or sulfur dioxide as coolants. Both are toxic. Leaks create health hazards. The systems require constant monitoring, frequent repairs, specialized expertise. Pickfair employs a refrigeration technician, Joseph Kowalski, according to a 1926 invoice preserved at the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences Library, who visits weekly to check systems, repair leaks, ensure safe operation. Food storage extends beyond refrigeration. Dry goods occupy pantries larger than average kitchens. Flour arrives in 50-pound sacks, sugar in 25-pound bags, coffee beans by the 10-pound container. The scale reflects not just large parties, but the era's shopping patterns, bulk purchasing, and long-term storage, rather than frequent small purchases. Wine cellars occupy the coolest basement corners. Temperature-controlled spaces hold thousands of bottles, California wines primarily, supplemented by French and Italian imports. Prohibition complicates, but doesn't eliminate this collection. Pickford and Fairbanks acquire sacramental wine permits, legal loophole exploited widely by wealthy Californians during the 1920s. They also maintain pre-prohibition stocks legally grandfathered under Volstead Act provisions. Staff quarters occupy the eastern wing, dormitories, and private rooms for live-in employees. Service staircases connect basement to second floor, narrow and unadorned, hidden from guest sight. Servants move along these arteries unseen, so fires are lit before dawn, so breakfast appears at 8, so dirty linens vanish and return cleaned, so the illusion persists that beauty maintains itself effortlessly. The staff quarters themselves reveal much about 1920s class structures. Maids and lower-level staff share dormitory rooms, 4 to 6 women per room, single beds, minimal privacy. Higher status staff, butler, head cook, head housekeeper, receive private rooms, small but individual. The social secretary and Pickford's personal assistant occupy rooms in the main house, near the family quarters, reflecting their intermediary status between servants and employers. Laundry facilities occupy the basement alongside boiler rooms. Industrial washing machines, hand-cranked in early years, electric-powered by mid-1920s, process enormous volumes. Pickford changes clothes multiple times daily. Guests generate additional laundry. Table linens from dinner parties require immediate cleaning. Towels, sheets, staff uniforms. The textile volume is staggering. 3 women work full-time in the laundry through most of the 1920s. Rosa Martinez, head laundress, supervises 2 assistants whose names don't survive in records. They work 6 days weekly, 10 hours daily, washing, drying, pressing, folding, mending. The labor is physically demanding, lifting wet linens, working in steam-filled rooms, standing for hours at pressing stations. Pickfair employs well over 100 people at peak operation through the 1920s. Maids, footmen, cooks, laundresses, stable hands, gardeners, chauffeurs, a social secretary, a projectionist for the private screening room. Their names survive sporadically in records. Anna Rodriguez, head housekeeper, mentioned in Mary Pickford's correspondence. Thomas Walsh, head groundskeeper, photographed standing beside Fairbanks in 1924. Chen Wei, assistant gardener under William Chen, listed in employment records at the California State Archives. The stable staff deserves particular mention. Pickford and Fairbanks maintain approximately a dozen horses through the 1920s, riding horses primarily, though also carriage horses for ceremonial occasions. The stables require mucking daily, feeding twice daily, grooming, veterinary care, equipment maintenance. 4 men work full-time as stable hands and grooms. Horses represent significant expense beyond staff wages. Feed costs alone exceed $200 monthly. Veterinary care, shoeing, equipment replacement, stable maintenance. The total easily surpasses $500 monthly. For animals that serve primarily recreational purposes, that exist mainly as symbols of aristocratic leisure. But symbols matter. Horses signal connection to pre-industrial aristocracy, to European landed gentry, to American Western mythology. Pickford photographed on horseback projects different image than Pickford photographed beside an automobile, though she owns several cars as well, maintained by 2 full-time chauffeurs who also serve as mechanics. Their wages vary by position and skill. Maids earn approximately $15 to $20 weekly. Head staff, butler, head cook, social secretary, command $40 to $60 weekly. Comfortable wages for the era, better than factory work, far below the thousands, Pickford and Fairbanks earn per week. Monthly operating costs during peak years likely range from $5,000 to $8,000, equivalent to roughly $85,000 to $135,000 monthly today. Staff wages, approximately $3,000 monthly for 100 employees averaging $30 per week. Utilities, $500 to $700 monthly. Electricity from the private power plant, coal for heating, water for 18 acres of gardens, and 1 swimming pool. Food and beverage, $1,000 to $2,000 monthly, depending on guest load. Weekend parties for 60 people consumed substantial provisions. Wine cellars required constant restocking. Maintenance, $500 monthly minimum. Paint, repairs, landscaping supplies, equipment replacement, property taxes. Beverly Hills incorporated in 1914 and immediately began taxing estates. Pickfair's assessment likely generated $3,000 to $4,000 annually in property taxes during the 1920s, approximately $300 monthly. Insurance, another $300 to $500 monthly, covering structure, contents, liability. Those numbers work when household income exceeds $100,000 monthly, as Pickford and Fairbanks' did during peak earning years. The estate consumes resources at rates that would swallow middle-class family annual earnings in months, yet the money keeps flowing. Pickford's films gross millions. Fairbanks matches her. United Artists distributes their work globally. They're not merely wealthy, they're industrial-scale wealthy, generating revenue streams that make $5,000 monthly as negligible as pocket change. The math works, for now. But underneath this efficient machinery, a question forms. What happens when the revenue streams slow? When films stop earning? When the machinery continues consuming resources while producing nothing? The infrastructure guarantees that Pickfair cannot exist in diminished form. You cannot maintain the estate with half the staff, partial power, intermittent heating. The systems are integrated. Everything connects. Cut one element, and the whole structure becomes unlivable. This isn't a house you can scale down. It's a machine that operates at full capacity or not at all. Christmas, 1925. Snow never falls in Beverly Hills, but Pickfair glows like a fairy tale palace regardless, every window lit. The swimming pool, heated now, technological marvel, steams gently into cool December air. Music drifts from the ballroom where a live orchestra plays. The guest list reads like a catalog of the 20th century's most influential figures. Charlie Chaplin arrives, naturally, co-founder of United Artists, closest friend to both Fairbanks and Pickford. His genius for physical comedy translates into wealth that rivals theirs, though his politics will eventually cost him everything when America turns suspicious of intellectuals who question capitalism. Chaplin at Pickfair is different from Chaplin on screen. The frantic energy, the physical comedy, the pathos, all absent. Here he's thoughtful, quiet, engaged in serious conversation about film as art form, about comedy as philosophical statement, about the responsibility artists bear toward audiences. He and Pickford often retreat to the library during parties, away from the crowd, discussing business decisions about United Artists. She values his judgment. He values her business acumen. Their partnership is intellectual more than social, founded on mutual respect between equals who understand the industry from inside. Albert Einstein attends during his 1931 visit to California, later than this particular Christmas, but the parties follow similar patterns. The physicist whose theories rewrite cosmic understanding while Hollywood rewrites cultural understanding. He's fascinated by the movie industry, by how images manipulate emotion, by the parallel between relativity and editing that makes time elastic on screen. Einstein at dinner asks Chaplin, "What do people actually see when they watch your films?" Chaplin responds, "They see themselves. I'm just the mirror." The conversation continues for hours, touching on perception, reality, the relationship between observer and observed, quantum mechanics, and cinematic technique finding unexpected common ground. Lord Mountbatten visits from England in 1924. British royalty charmed by American celebrity, describing Pickfair as America's Buckingham Palace, a comparison that flatters and reveals. Actual palaces hold power through birthright and tradition. Pickfair holds power through performance and charisma, thoroughly American in its democratic aristocracy where fame replaces bloodlines. Mountbatten represents everything Pickford aspires to: legitimate aristocracy, inherited prestige, social position that requires no justification. His presence at Pickfair validates her status. If British royalty recognizes Hollywood royalty as equivalent, then the transformation is complete. Movie stars aren't merely entertainers. They're legitimate aristocracy. But Mountbatten also recognizes something Pickford doesn't see: the fragility of fame-based power. Birthright aristocracy persists across generations. Fame-based aristocracy lasts one lifetime maximum, usually less. His comparison between Pickfair and Buckingham Palace is partly sincere admiration, partly subtle condescension, acknowledging current power while noting its impermanence. President Calvin Coolidge never actually visits. That legend persists without documentary evidence. But Herbert Hoover does, before his presidency, recognizing that power congregates here as surely as it congregates in Washington. Hoover is Secretary of Commerce during his visit, already positioning for presidential run, understanding that Hollywood shapes public opinion increasingly. His conversations with Pickford and Fairbanks reportedly focus on film industry economics, exports, international distribution, the role of American culture in post-World War I diplomacy. Movies are becoming American export, spreading American values, American aesthetics, American aspirations globally. Hoover recognizes this as strategic asset. Franklin D. Roosevelt visits years later after Pickford's divorce from Fairbanks, when Pickfair's influence is fading but its reputation persists. Roosevelt, confined to wheelchair, appreciates Pickfair's accessible design. Unlike many estates built before disability considerations, Pickfair's main floor is largely level, easily navigated. Other guests, Amelia Earhart, fresh from aviation triumphs, discussing with Fairbanks the parallels between flight and film, both creating new perspectives, both literally showing audiences views previously impossible. F. Scott Fitzgerald, though accounts differ on whether he actually attended or simply wrote about attending in correspondence. The Duke and Duchess of Alba from Spain, selling family treasures to maintain estates, finding ready buyers in Pickford who wants European prestige attached to American wealth. King Rama VII of Siam, during his American tour in 1931, later than this particular Christmas, but illustrative of the international power Pickfair wields. The king travels specifically to meet American film stars, understanding that cultural influence increasingly matters as much as political or military power. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, investigating spiritualism with the same analytical mind that created Sherlock Holmes, finds at Pickfair both skepticism and interest. Pickford is fascinated by spiritualism, the possibility of contacting her deceased father, of finding meaning beyond material success. Fairbanks is skeptical but tolerant. Doyle conducts seances at Pickfair that produce either genuine contact with spirits or elaborate psychological theater, depending on your perspective. The parties follow rituals. Guests arrive Friday evening. Dinner in the formal dining room, 18-foot ceilings, Louis XVI furniture, 18th century paintings lining walls. Pickford sits at the head of the table, Fairbanks to her right, guests arranged by status and conversational compatibility. Seating arrangements receive extraordinary attention. Pickford spends hours planning who sits near whom, anticipating conversations, preventing conflicts, engineering connections. She seats Einstein near Chaplin, knowing both think deeply about their crafts. She separates political rivals. She positions quiet guests near talkative ones, ensuring conversational balance. Dinner typically extends 3 hours, multiple courses, European formal service, wines carefully selected. The meal is performance as much as sustenance. Pickford and Fairbanks are on stage, projecting charm, grace, sophistication for hours without break. After dinner, the screening room. Fairbanks and Pickford show their latest films before public release. Guests witness cinema history in private preview, offering feedback that sometimes shapes final cuts. The screening room holds approximately 40 people in theater seating, velvet chairs, dimmed lighting, professional projection equipment operated by full-time projectionist. The films shown are often works in progress. Pickford values guest reactions, watches faces during screenings, notes which moments land and which fall flat. She treats these screenings as test audiences, gathering data to inform editing decisions. This practice, showing unfinished work to trusted viewers, becomes standard in Hollywood. But Pickford pioneers it at Pickfair. Then dancing in the ballroom or tennis under electric lights, another technological marvel, or simply conversation on terraces overlooking Los Angeles, spreading below like a constellation of ambition. The tennis courts are lit by arc lights, carbon arc technology, same used in film production, requiring operator to adjust manually as carbons burn down. The effect is dramatic. Bright white light illuminating court, while surrounding landscape remains dark, creating isolated pool of visibility like stage set. Players perform in spotlight while guests watch from darkened terraces. Fairbanks dominates tennis. He's athletic, competitive, aggressive. He plays to win, sometimes embarrassing less. Skilled guests. Pickford occasionally intervenes, suggesting doubles matches to balance competition, protecting guests from humiliation while maintaining Fairbanks's enthusiasm. Saturdays, tennis tournaments, swimming, horseback riding through Beverly Hills canyons. Pickford and Fairbanks are gracious hosts, but also performers, maintaining charm through 16-hour days of entertaining. The swimming pool, supposedly Hollywood's first in-ground pool, though that claim is disputed, measures approximately 40 feet by 20 feet. Shallow end 4 feet, deep end 8 feet. Heated by boiler system connected to the main house. Tiled in blue and white ceramic. Surrounded by cabanas, where guests change into swimming costumes. Swimming during this era involves careful propriety management. Men and women swim separately initially. Mixed swimming, permitted only later in the day, with proper chaperonage. Pickford enforces these rules, despite her own relative progressiveness, understanding that scandal would damage the carefully constructed image. She conducts her famous bikini photo shoot at this pool in 1922, revolutionary for the era when women's swimming costumes typically covered from neck to knee. The photographs are tasteful by later standards, scandalous for 1922. But Pickford calculates the scandal value, enough to generate publicity, not enough to destroy her sweetheart image. The calculation proves correct. The photographs circulate widely, generating enormous attention while maintaining her fundamental respectability. Horseback riding follows established trails through still undeveloped canyons behind Beverly Hills. Small groups, 6 to 8 riders typically, depart late morning, ride 2 to 3 hours, return for lunch. The rides provide escape from Pickfair's social intensity, allowing private conversations away from the performance space. Sundays, farewell brunches. Guests depart with the understanding that being invited to Pickfair once means little. Being invited repeatedly means you matter. The brunches are elaborate productions, buffet service with dozens of dishes, fresh flowers on every table, live music from string quartet. Guests eat, socialize, gradually depart through late afternoon. Pickford and Fairbanks stand at the door, personally saying goodbye to each guest, maintaining performance until the last car disappears down the driveway. Then, finally, they relax. The staff begins cleanup. Pickford retreats to her private quarters, exhausted from performing. Fairbanks often leaves immediately for his club or friends, needing separation after intense social engagement. This social machinery runs perfectly for nearly a decade. Pickfair isn't just a house, or even just a social hub. It's the place where Hollywood transitions from entertainment industry to cultural force, where movie stars become legitimate power brokers, where European royalty seeks validation from American celebrities, where the 20th century's emerging meritocracy finds its cathedral. But underneath this golden surface, quiet pressures gather. By 1928, the pattern is unsustainable. Pickford is 36 years old. Fairbanks is 45. They've hosted hundreds of parties, entertained thousands of guests, performed perfection for a decade without pause. The toll shows privately, even as public image remains flawless. Pickford suffers from what would now be recognized as anxiety and depression, though neither diagnosis exists in useful form during the 1920s. She experiences insomnia, headaches, digestive problems, emotional volatility. Her physician prescribes various tonics and rest, but rest is impossible when Pickfair demands constant attention. She begins drinking more than socially, not publicly, not obviously. But staff notice that she requests whiskey in her private quarters, that bottles empty faster than entertaining alone would justify. The drinking starts as medication, relief from anxiety, help sleeping, but establishes patterns that will worsen dramatically later. Fairbanks exhausts himself differently. His film career requires constant physical performance. At 45, the stunts that made him famous become difficult, dangerous, painful. His body accumulates injuries, knee problems, shoulder damage, back pain. He continues performing because his image demands it, but the cost escalates. He also begins affairs. Not one dramatic relationship, but a pattern of infidelities with younger women, actresses, extras, women he meets socially. Some affairs last weeks, others hours. None threaten his marriage immediately, but cumulatively, they erode whatever authentic connection existed between him and Pickford. She knows. Staff whisper. Friends mention seeing Fairbanks with other women. Pickford chooses not to confront him directly, calculating that public divorce would damage both their careers and destroy Pickfair's function as symbol of Hollywood perfection. So she performs Ignorance, another role in a life composed entirely of performances. The films that finance everything are changing. Silent cinema is dying. Sound pictures arrive in 1927 with The Jazz Singer. By 1929, sound is industry standard. Fairbanks and Pickford, masters of silent performance, face technological obsolescence. Their physical grace and expressive faces matter less when actors must speak, must deliver dialogue, must compete with Broadway-trained voices. Pickford's high-pitched voice, adorable in person, sounds shrill when amplified through early sound equipment. Fairbanks's voice is better, but his appeal was always visual. The athletic grace, the smile, the physical comedy that sound makes secondary to dialogue. They both make sound films. Pickford's Coquette in 1929 wins her an Academy Award, not necessarily for quality, but in recognition of her career, her influence, her symbolic importance. The film performs adequately, but not spectacularly. Her subsequent sound films do worse. Fairbanks's sound films fail commercially and critically. Audiences don't want to hear him speak. They want to watch him leap and fight and smile. Sound technology makes those elements secondary, and Fairbanks, without his physicality foregrounded, is just another middle-aged actor. Their United Artists partnership remains valuable. The company distributes other filmmakers' work profitably. But Pickford and Fairbanks personally are declining assets, generating less revenue annually, even as Pickfair's operating costs remain constant or increase. The math that worked perfectly in 1925 starts straining by 1929. Still solvent, still comfortable. But the margin between income and expenses narrows yearly. Their marriage, publicly perfect, privately fractures. Fairbanks's infidelities become harder to ignore when he starts pursuing relationships rather than affairs. Women he sees repeatedly, women who expect public acknowledgement, women who threaten the carefully maintained facade. Pickford's drinking increases. Staff notice she sometimes appears at breakfast disheveled, occasionally cancels morning appointments, sometimes speaks sharply to servants in ways that contrast with her usual courtesy. These are small signs, easily hidden, but they indicate deteriorating emotional state. Their time together at Pickfair decreases. Fairbanks travels more, Europe, New York, anywhere that isn't Beverly Hills. When home, he stays at his club frequently, or visits friends rather than returning to Pickfair nightly. Pickford occupies the estate increasingly alone, hosting fewer parties, seeing fewer guests, retreating into isolation. By 1933, they're married in name only. Fairbanks maintains residence elsewhere. Pickford lives at Pickfair with staff and emptiness. They appear together occasionally for publicity photographs, maintaining the illusion, but everyone in Hollywood knows the truth. The question forms silently. How long can this last? The answer comes quickly. January 10th, 1936. Mary Pickford and Douglas Fairbanks divorce after 16 years of marriage. The announcement shocks a public that believed in their fairy tale, that needed to believe movie stars experience transcendent love unavailable to ordinary people. The divorce finalizes in a Nevada courtroom with minimal details released, irreconcilable differences. No dramatic scandal breaks publicly. Both Fairbanks and Pickford are too savvy for that, understanding that scandal damages earning potential. But those close to the couple know the truth that emerges gradually. Fairbanks's infidelities became impossible to ignore. His romance with Sylvia, Lady Ashley, British socialite and former stage actress, began while he was still married to Pickford. Fairbanks wanted freedom from the crushing performance of being Douglas Fairbanks, husband of Mary Pickford, king of Hollywood. He wanted to age without America watching, wanted to fail without audiences mourning. Pickford wanted control over her career, over her image, over her marriage. She built Pickfair as a kingdom where she ruled absolutely, and Fairbanks increasingly resented being consort rather than king. The divorce settlement is negotiated privately. Pickford receives sole ownership of Pickfair, valued at approximately $1 million, though appraisals vary. Fairbanks retains other properties, a Santa Monica beach house, investments in downtown Los Angeles real estate, various financial instruments. They divide their United Artists shares equitably. Both remain wealthy by any standard. But Pickfair changes fundamentally. It's no longer Hollywood's palace. It's a divorced woman's home, and in 1936 America, that distinction matters enormously. Public reaction is complex. Some blame Pickford. Should have been more understanding. Should have tolerated Fairbanks's nature. Should have prioritized marriage over career. Others blame Fairbanks philandering, abandoning America's sweetheart, destroying a perfect marriage, most simply mourn the end of what they believed was Hollywood's one genuine love story. Fairbanks moves to Santa Monica, then eventually to London, where he marries Lady Ashley. He returns to Los Angeles occasionally, but never to Pickfair. The estate belongs to Pickford now, solely and completely. He has no claim, no reason to visit, no connection except memory. He dies in 1939 at 56, heart attack, likely related to years of athletic strain combined with what was probably undiagnosed heart disease. His death devastates Hollywood, but affects Pickford in ways she never publicly acknowledges. Whatever anger she felt about the divorce, whatever hurt from the infidelities, she also loved him genuinely, at least initially. His death closes possibilities, reconciliation, closure, adult friendship after divorce. Now there's only memory. Pickford remains at Pickfair for 44 more years. Mary Pickford marries again in 1937. Charles Buddy Rogers, actor and musician, 11 years her junior. Their marriage lasts until her death in 1979, though Buddy barely registers in popular imagination compared to Fairbanks. Rogers is kind, supportive, reliably present, everything Fairbanks wasn't. But he's also not famous, not powerful, not someone who transforms Pickfair into a power center. He's a companion, not a co-star. The wedding is private, ceremony at Pickfair with approximately 30 guests. No press initially. The announcement comes days later, carefully managed to minimize scandal. Pickford is 45, Rogers is 34. The age difference raises eyebrows, but generates less scandal than her divorce from Fairbanks. Rogers moves into Pickfair and assumes undefined role. He's not owner. Pickford retains sole ownership through their marriage. He's not manager. Pickford maintains control over household decisions. He's present, supportive, quietly managing logistics that allow Pickford to continue living in the style she demands. Their relationship appears genuinely affectionate. Photographs from the 1940s show them comfortable together, smiling naturally, touching casually. Staff report that Rogers treats Pickford with consistent kindness, that he accommodates her increasingly difficult moods without complaint, that he provides stability through decades of decline. With Fairbanks gone and Rogers providing domestic stability rather than social electricity, Pickfair's golden age ends. The parties stop. The presidents stop visiting. The guest rooms remain empty. Pickford withdraws gradually from public life. Her film career effectively ended with the transition to sound. She made several talkies in the early 1930s. Coquette won her an Academy Award in 1929, but her screen persona, built on silent film's visual innocence, translated poorly to sound. Audiences wanted to remember her as America's sweetheart, frozen at 25 curls and optimism. They didn't want to watch her age into ordinary adulthood. Her last film, Secrets, releases in 1933 and loses money. She's 41 years old, playing characters a decade younger. Critics note the disconnect between her age and roles, between her sophisticated real personality and the innocent character she's expected to portray. She recognizes the problem and retires from acting rather than forcing a career that no longer works. So she retreats to Pickfair and becomes its prisoner. The staff remains, reduced but still substantial. 20 to 30 employees maintain the estate through the 1940s and 1950s. Gardens still bloom. Rooms stay cleaned, but nobody sees them. Pickford rarely ventures beyond the grounds. Groceries arrive. Servants manage everything. The world changes. World War II, Cold War, Kennedy assassination, moon landing, Vietnam, and Pickfair remains frozen in 1925, maintained as museum to Hollywood's golden age. During World War II, Pickford makes modest efforts toward public engagement. She hosts occasional fundraisers at Pickfair for war bonds. She makes radio appearances, encouraging Americans to support the war effort. She visits military hospitals in Los Angeles, bringing her celebrity to wounded soldiers who remember her from silent films or their parents' memories. But these efforts are sporadic, dutiful rather than enthusiastic. She performs the expected role of Hollywood royalty supporting national crisis, but her heart isn't engaged. She wants to retreat, not perform. The post-war years bring complete withdrawal. By 1950, Pickford rarely leaves Pickfair. She sees few guests. She maintains correspondence with old friends but declines invitations. She watches films in her private screening room, not her own films, which she reportedly finds painful, but current releases that keep her connected superficially to the industry she helped create. Pickford struggles with alcoholism during these decades. The drinking starts casually in the 1930s, worsens after Fairbanks's death, becomes debilitating by the 1960s. Vodka, primarily. Hidden in juice. Glasses. Consumed alone in rooms that once hosted Einstein and Chaplin. Staff notice. Buddy Rogers notices. Friends who still visit notice. But intervention is impossible. Pickford is functioning. She manages her finances, makes decisions about the estate, maintains correspondence. She's not incapacitated, just medicating, numbing, escaping reality through the only means available. She's not performing anymore, not for cameras, not for guests. She's simply existing, surrounded by evidence of her own irrelevance in a house that costs thousands monthly to maintain while generating nothing except memory. The 1950s bring modest renovations, electrical systems updated, plumbing modernized. These changes are maintenance, not transformation. Pickfair adapts minimally to modernity, preserving its 1920s aesthetic as Pickford preserves her self-image. Forever young, forever relevant, forever the sweetheart. But youth fades. Relevance fades. Time proves less forgiving than movie cameras with soft focus lenses. The renovations reveal infrastructure deterioration. Electrical wiring installed in 1920 was adequate then, but dangerous by 1950 standards. The plumbing, copper pipes, brass fixtures, corrodes after 3 decades. The boiler system requires replacement. The roof needs repair. Every system simultaneously reaches end of life, demanding investment that Pickford provides but resents. The costs escalate. What was $5,000 monthly in 1925 becomes $8,000 monthly by 1950. Not just inflation, but increasing complexity, aging systems requiring more frequent repairs, rising labor costs as post-war economy generates better employment options than domestic service. By the 1960s, Pickfair becomes Hollywood legend and Hollywood joke simultaneously. Tourists drive past, hoping for glimpses. Architectural historians request visits, occasionally granted, more often denied. Journalists want interviews. Pickford declines. She's protecting the image, protecting the fantasy, protecting herself from confronting how completely the world moved on. The few who do visit report melancholic atmosphere. Rooms maintained perfectly but unoccupied. Furniture covered in sheets. Gardens still beautiful, but somehow mournful. Staff moving quietly through empty spaces, maintaining standards for an audience that never arrives. Pickford herself, when visitors are granted access, appears simultaneously gracious and fragile. She's performing still, Mary Pickford, America's sweetheart, Hollywood royalty. But the performance is transparent now, everyone recognizing it as performance. The gap between image and reality, visible to everyone except possibly Pickford herself. The mansion ages alongside her. Paint fades. Copper roofing oxidizes to green patina. Gardens grow wilder as the gardening staff shrinks from 10 to 5 to 3. The swimming pool, Hollywood's first in-ground pool, technological marvel of 1920, cracks and is filled with concrete rather than repaired in the late 1960s. Too expensive. Too unnecessary for a woman who no longer swims, no longer entertains, no longer needs the symbols that justified the expense. The question that haunted the golden years now has its answer. This cannot last. But Pickford maintains the fiction until her death. She will not sell, will not convert to museum, will not adapt to reality. Pickfair is her kingdom, and she'll rule it in isolation rather than surrender control. Numbers tell stories that romance obscures. Let's examine what maintaining Pickfair actually required across 6 decades. During the 1920s Golden Age, when parties were constant and guest lists included presidents, monthly operating costs likely range from $5,000 to $8,000, equivalent to roughly $85,000 to $135,000 monthly today. Staff wages, approximately $3,000 monthly for 100 employees, averaging $30 per week. Utilities, $500 to $700 monthly. Electricity from the private power plant, coal for heating, water for 18 acres of gardens, and 1 swimming pool. Food and beverage, $1,000 to $2,000 monthly depending on guest load. Weekend parties for 60 people consumed substantial provisions. Wine cellars required constant restocking. Maintenance, $500 monthly minimum. Paint, repairs, landscaping supplies, equipment replacement. Property taxes, Beverly Hills incorporated in 1914 and immediately began taxing estates. Pickfair's assessment likely generated $3,000 to $4,000 annually in property taxes during the 1920s, approximately $300 monthly. Insurance, another $300 to $500 monthly, covering structure, contents, liability. Those numbers work when household income exceeds $100,000 monthly, as Pickford and Fairbanks's did during peak earning years. But film revenues decline through the 1930s. Pickford's last film, Secrets, releases in 1933 and loses money. Fairbanks's sound films perform poorly. United Artists continues generating income from distributing other people's films, but the personal earning power fades. By the 1940s, Pickford's annual income, from United Artists dividends, royalties, investments, probably ranges from $100,000 to $200,000. Comfortable, wealthy by normal standards, insufficient for maintaining Pickfair at Golden Age standards, the estate becomes financial burden rather than power center. Pickford reduces staff gradually, closes wings of the mansion, simplifies operations, but the baseline costs, taxes, utilities, minimum staff persist. By the 1950s, the math becomes unsustainable without drawing down capital. Pickford's investment portfolio, conservatively managed by business advisors who understood that her earning years were finite, generates approximately $150,000 annually. Pickfair costs at least $100,000 annually to maintain at reduced standards. Her personal living expenses, travel, charitable contributions consume the remainder. She's not saving, not accumulating wealth, simply managing slow depletion while hoping she dies before the money runs out. Property taxes escalate through the decades as Beverly Hills becomes prime real estate. By the 1970s, Pickfair's tax assessment likely exceeds $50,000 annually for a house that generates zero income, for a woman whose earning years ended 40 years prior. The comparison to average American incomes is stark. In 1970, median household income in the United States was approximately $9,000 annually. Pickford spent that much just on property taxes, before any other expenses. Her lifestyle existed in completely different economic universe from normal American experience. Insurance premiums escalate similarly. The estate's contents, furniture, art, decorative objects are worth millions. Coverage requires tens of thousands annually. The structure itself needs comprehensive insurance against fire, earthquake, liability. By the 1970s, total insurance costs likely exceeded $20,000 annually. Utilities increase as electricity rates rise. The private power generation system is abandoned by the 1950s. Too expensive to maintain, municipal power more reliable. But 18 acres of grounds require irrigation year-round. Heating and cooling costs escalate as energy prices rise through the 1970s. Maintenance becomes increasingly expensive. Skilled craftsmen who understood 1920s construction techniques become rare. Simple repairs, require specialists. The antique Spanish tiles need custom replacements when they crack. The leaded glass windows need expert conservation. The parquet floors require refinishing by craftsmen familiar with historic techniques. Staff costs persist even as numbers decline. By the 1970s, Pickfair employs approximately 10 full-time staff: housekeeper, cook, 3 maids, 2 gardeners, a driver, a handyman, and Pickford's personal secretary. Their combined wages, plus payroll taxes and benefits, exceed $40,000 annually. The total, approximately $120,000 annually by 1975. Pickford's income barely covers these costs. She's depleting investment principal gradually, though her wealth is sufficient that depletion won't create poverty in her lifetime. But the trajectory is clear. Pickfair consumes wealth without generating it. Every year, the gap between revenue and expense widens. Every year, the estate becomes more expensive to maintain while simultaneously becoming less valuable as functional residence due to aging systems and obsolete design. Pickford never faces poverty. Her investments, managed conservatively, provide adequate income for comfortable living. But comfortable living and maintaining 18-acre estate with 35 bedrooms are different financial realities. The same pattern repeats at virtually every Gilded Age and early Hollywood estate. Construction costs represent only the beginning. Operational costs accumulate relentlessly. Without sustained income streams, even great wealth eventually depletes. Biltmore Estate in North Carolina faces similar mathematics. So does San Simeon. So does every mansion built during eras of cheap labor and minimal regulation. When labor costs rise, when taxation increases, when heating bills multiply, when insurance premiums escalate, the math stops balancing. Pickfair survives as long as it does because Pickford refuses to sell, refuses to adapt, refuses to acknowledge reality. She's wealthy enough to sustain the losses for decades, but she can't sustain them forever. When she dies in 1979 at 86, she leaves an estate valued at approximately $26 million. Substantial but not spectacular given her lifetime earnings. Much of that wealth is tied up in Pickfair itself, which appraisers value at roughly $4 million. The valuation is complex. As real estate, 18 acres in Beverly Hills, the property is worth potentially $10 million or more to developers who would demolish the structure and subdivide the land. As historic structure, the value is indeterminate. Museums typically don't purchase properties. Preservation societies lack resources. Private buyers interested in maintaining historic estates are rare. The $4 million appraisal reflects compromise, the value to a buyer who might maintain at least some historic character while adapting for personal use. The estate passes to Buddy Rogers, who inherits automatically as surviving spouse. He's 76 years old. He lived at Pickfair for 42 years but never owned it. Now it's his problem. He makes the rational decision. He sells. Pia Zadora, actress, singer, controversial figure, and her husband Meshulam Riklis, businessman, corporate raider, considerably older, purchased Pickfair in 1988 for approximately $6.6 million. The price reflects both real estate value and intangible worth. They're buying Hollywood legend alongside 18 acres in Beverly Hills. Zadora is 34 at purchase. She's had modest success in film and music, though critics dismiss her as manufactured talent promoted. Through her husband's wealth rather than genuine ability. Fair or not, this reputation makes her controversial even before she touches Pickfair. Her film career peaked with Butterfly in 1982. Controversial role playing a seductive teenager, widely panned by critics, winning her a Golden Globe that many suspected was influenced by Riklis's financial connections rather than her performance merit. The suspicions may be unfair, but perception matters. Zadora is seen as woman playing at artistry rather than genuine artist. Riklis is 64, wealth estimated at hundreds of millions from corporate acquisitions and leveraged buyouts. He built fortune through aggressive business tactics, hostile takeovers, asset stripping, leveraging debt against acquired companies. His business ethics are questionable to many observers, though nothing illegal is proven. He views Pickfair as investment and status symbol, proof that money buys entrance to Hollywood aristocracy. The estate is tax deduction, asset appreciation opportunity, and social validation simultaneously. They move in with plans to renovate, modernize, update, reasonable intentions. The mansion is nearly 70 years old. Electrical systems are outdated and potentially dangerous. Plumbing is failing throughout. The structure needs substantial work. But renovation escalates to demolition. The timeline matters. They purchase in 1988. Initial renovations begin in 1989. Modest updates, necessary repairs. But by 1990, the scope expands dramatically. Permits filed with Beverly Hills Building Department indicate demolition of significant portions of the original structure. Contemporary accounts vary. Some claim they demolished the original structure entirely. Others insist they preserved portions and merely expanded significantly. Architectural records suggest the truth lies between major portions of the original Pickfair were demolished, particularly the iconic wings designed by Wallace Neff, and many character-defining interiors, while foundations and some structural elements remained. The justifications offered publicly are structural: termite damage throughout, foundation settling, plumbing failures, electrical hazards, all likely true to some degree. But preservation-minded architects who examine the property before demolition insist that restoration was possible, that the structural issues were solvable, that demolition was choice rather than necessity. Zadora later adds another justification: ghosts. She claims Pickfair was haunted, that she and Rickless experienced supernatural phenomena, cold spots, inexplicable sounds, objects moving, presence of unseen observers. The ghost stories have circulated about Pickfair since Pickford's death, visitors reporting eerie sensations, staff mentioning strange occurrences. Whether the phenomena were genuine supernatural activity, psychological responses to living in someone else's famous home, or convenient justification for planned demolition remains disputed. Skeptics note that ghost complaints emerged after demolition decisions were made, not before purchase. The new construction, completed by 1992, barely resembles the original. Mediterranean revival gives way to Venetian palazzo styling. The modest elegance Neff created becomes theatrical excess. Square footage more than doubles, from approximately 35,000 square feet to over 45,000. Swimming pools multiply from 1 to 3. Tennis courts expand. The estate transforms from historically significant mansion to generic luxury compound. Hollywood reacts with fury. The Los Angeles Conservancy protests publicly. They file complaints with Beverly Hills Planning Commission. They organize petition campaigns. They appeal to Zadora and Rickless directly, offering to facilitate adaptive reuse plans, suggesting museum possibilities, proposing preservation alternatives. All efforts fail. The demolition proceeds legally. Permits are valid. Ownership grants rights. No historic preservation ordinances protect Pickfair despite its cultural significance. Architectural historians write op-eds in Los Angeles Times and Architectural Digest mourning the loss. They catalog what's destroyed: Neff's elegant proportions, the leaded glass windows, the original parquet flooring, the ceiling murals, the spatial relationships that made the house architecturally significant beyond its celebrity associations. Mary Pickford's living relatives and friends express outrage. Lillian Gish, legendary silent film actress and Pickford's friend, issues statement calling the demolition cultural vandalism. Buddy Rogers, Pickford's widower who sold the property, remains publicly silent but reportedly expresses private regret. Even people with no particular connection to Pickfair or silent cinema feel the loss, not of bricks and mortar exactly, but of tangible connection to Hollywood's founding myth. Pickfair represented moment when movies became legitimate art form, when actors became cultural leaders, when Hollywood became idea as much as place. Zadora defends the decision in interviews. The house was structurally unsound, they claim. Foundation experts declared restoration cost prohibitive. They couldn't live safely in the deteriorated structure. They tried to preserve it, but engineering realities forced demolition. These justifications contain elements of truth. Pickfair was indeed deteriorating after decades of minimal maintenance. Systems were obsolete. Repairs would have been expensive, likely millions of dollars to restore properly. But expensive isn't impossible. Plenty of historic estates undergo multi-million-dollar restorations. The question wasn't technical feasibility, but willingness to invest in preservation versus preference for new construction tailored to contemporary tastes. The truth likely combines factors: genuine structural issues, desire for modern amenities, and psychological discomfort living in someone else's famous home. Easier to build new than renovate old. Easier to create your own legacy than maintain someone else's. The ghost defense is particularly controversial. Critics suggest Zadora invented or exaggerated paranormal experiences to justify demolition that was really about erasing someone else's legacy to establish her own. Believers in paranormal phenomena counter that Pickford's spirit might genuinely haunt the space, unhappy about strangers occupying her kingdom. Either interpretation is possible, neither is provable. The effect is same. Historical significance becomes subordinate to owners' comfort and preferences, but intentions matter less than results. Pickfair, the actual physical Pickfair, where Chaplin laughed and Einstein mused and presidents, networked, ceased to exist. What remained was an expensive house called Pickfair, occupying the same address. The name itself becomes controversial. Zadora and Riklis retain Pickfair as a state name, incorporating it into the new property's identity. Preservationists argue this is dishonest. The original Pickfair is destroyed. Naming the replacement Pickfair perpetuates false continuity. But property rights include naming rights. Legally, they can call it whatever they choose. The name persists while the substance vanishes. Zadora and Riklis occupy the new Pickfair through the 1990s. They host occasional parties, less frequent than Pickford's golden age, but maintaining some social function. They're trying to recreate Pickfair's status without understanding that status came from who lived there, not from address or architecture. Hollywood largely ignores them. The A-list guests who might have attended parties at Pickford's Pickfair don't attend parties at Zadora's Pickfair. The estate has address but not significance, structure but not soul. Zadora and Riklis divorce in 2003 after 3 decades of marriage. The new Pickfair becomes asset to divide and divorce settlement. Neither wants to keep it. Too expensive, too controversial, too associated with public relations disaster. The estate sells in 2005 to buyers who remain relatively anonymous initially. Purchase price, approximately $18 million. Substantial increase from their purchase price, reflecting primarily land value appreciation rather than structure value. In 2008, it sells again for $60 million, then record for Los Angeles residential real estate, to Corey Hong, businesswoman whose family owns Chinese real estate empire. She plans to use it as West Coast residence and entertaining space. But timing is catastrophic. The 2008 financial crisis devastates real estate values globally. Hong's family businesses face liquidity problems, carrying costs for Pickfair, taxes, insurance, maintenance, staff exceed $200,000 annually. Without occupancy, these costs are pure loss. She retains the property briefly before financial complications force sale. The asking price drops from $60 million to $40 million to $30 million. No buyers emerge at any price during economic crisis when luxury real estate market collapses. In 2012, the estate finally sells to Nozar Ghazani, Iranian-born businessman, for approximately $13 million, 78% loss in value in just 4 years. The price reflects desperate seller meeting reluctant buyer in collapsed market. Ghazzani undertakes further renovations, the third major modification since Zadora's demolition. He adds security systems, updates technology, modernizes kitchens and bathrooms again. Each renovation erases more historical connection, replaces period details with contemporary equivalents. Current status: privately owned, not open to public. Occasional photographs appear in architectural magazines showing interiors that reference 1920s aesthetics superficially, chandeliers, marble, old-world styling, but lack the original's soul. They're expensive, not meaningful. The address persists: 1143 Summit Drive, Beverly Hills. GPS coordinates remain fixed. Property tax records continue listing Pickfair. But the connection to Hollywood history becomes increasingly abstract with each ownership transfer, each renovation, each decision prioritizing contemporary preferences over historical preservation. Demolishing Pickfair destroyed more than one mansion. It destroyed physical evidence of Hollywood's transformation from industry to institution. Pickfair represented the moment when movie stars became legitimate American aristocracy, when European royalty traveled to California seeking validation from actors, when presidents recognized that Hollywood shapes public opinion as powerfully as policy, when celebrity became currency that buys real power. That transformation happened in many places, certainly, but it happened first and most completely at Pickfair. The parties there weren't just social gatherings. They were laboratories where Hollywood figured out how fame translates to influence, where actors learned to leverage celebrity into business power, where the modern celebrity industrial complex was invented. Losing the building means losing the physical space where that invention occurred. History becomes abstract, without places to anchor it. You can read about Einstein visiting Hollywood, but standing in the room where Einstein ate dinner with Chaplin makes that history tangible, makes it real in ways that photographs can't. The demolition also destroyed evidence of early Hollywood craftsmanship. Wallace Neff's work at Pickfair represented California architecture at its most sophisticated. European tradition adapted to California landscapes and lifestyles. The leaded glass, the parquet floors, the ceiling murals, these weren't just decoration. They were craftsmanship that required skills largely lost to modern construction, which prioritizes efficiency over artistry. Each element told stories. The leaded glass windows installed in 1921 came from craftsmen who learned their trade in European cathedral workshops, immigrated to America seeking opportunity, brought centuries-old techniques to New World applications. When those windows were destroyed, not just glass was lost, but connection to craft traditions extending back medieval times. The parquet flooring, geometric patterns, and exotic woods, installed piece by tiny piece, required weeks of labor by craftsmen who understood wood grain, moisture content, expansion, and contraction patterns. Modern flooring is manufactured in factories, installed in hours. The old parquet represented different relationship between maker and material, different standards of patience and precision. The ceiling murals, celestial scenes painted by artists whose names are lost to history, demonstrated that even private spaces deserved artistic attention during that era. Modern construction rarely allocates budget for custom artistic work. Ceilings are painted white, possibly textured. The idea that residential ceilings might be canvases for original art seems extravagant, wasteful even. But this artistic attention made Pickfair more than expensive house. It made it cultural statement, evidence that America could produce beauty rivaling European tradition, that wealth deployed thoughtfully could create lasting value, all lost. And demolishing Pickfair destroyed the possibility of adaptive reuse, transforming the estate into museum, educational center, event space that would sustain itself financially while preserving history. Museums dedicated to silent film exist in Los Angeles. None occupy buildings where silent film history actually happened, because those buildings are demolished or transformed beyond recognition. Imagine Pickfair as museum. The living room preserved as it appeared during Golden Age parties, furniture arranged as period photographs show, interpretive materials explaining who sat where, what conversations occurred. The screening room functioning again, showing silent films to audiences seated where Einstein and Chaplin once sat. The gardens restored to 1920s specifications, maintained by horticultural students learning historic landscaping techniques. Such museum could generate revenue, admissions, event rentals, educational programs, while preserving history and educating public about Hollywood's founding era. The economics aren't simple, but numerous historic estates function successfully as museums. Pickfair's location in Beverly Hills complicates museum possibility, residential zoning, traffic concerns, neighborhood opposition to commercial activity. But these obstacles aren't insurmountable. Compromise solutions exist: limited visiting hours, small group tours, special event restrictions. The real obstacle was ownership transition. Buddy Rogers sold to highest bidder rather than seeking preservation-minded buyer. Zadora and Rickless bought as residents, not historical trust. Once in private hands with owners uninterested in preservation, demolition became matter of time. The pattern repeats constantly in Los Angeles. Historic structures vanish because property is more valuable than history, because owners want their own legacy rather than preserving others, because California lacks strong historic preservation laws that might prevent demolition of culturally significant buildings. Douglas Fairbanks's Rancho Zorro estate in San Diego, demolished in 1950s for suburban development. Charlie Chaplin's studio, partially preserved but heavily modified, operating as production facility rather than museum. Buster Keaton's Italian Villa, demolished in 1960s. Harold Lloyd's Green Acres, threatened constantly, preserved only through extraordinary effort by Lloyd family and preservation advocates. Marion Davies' Ocean House Beach estate, demolished in 1956 after fire damage rather than restored. The list is long, depressing, preventable. Each loss makes preservation of remaining historic properties more critical. Each loss diminishes collective understanding of Hollywood's history, making it abstract rather than tangible, story rather than place. Pickfair's demolition represents the most symbolic loss. The palace where Hollywood invented itself, destroyed by Hollywood's perpetual hunger for novelty, its pathological inability to preserve its own history. The irony is bitter. An industry built on preserving performances through film technology, on making permanent record of transient moments, on ensuring memories survive across generations. This industry cannot preserve its own physical history, cannot value buildings as much as celluloid, cannot recognize that places matter. What remains? Photographs, films, stories, memory, which fades with each generation. Is that enough?